Capitalism. You hear that word thrown around all the time, right? But do we really get what's going on under the hood of the system that pretty much powers our entire world? Well, today we're going to peel back the layers and get past the headlines to see what it's all about.
We're going to break down the engine of the modern global economy, for sure. But we're also asking a much bigger question. Is the capitalism we have today the same one you read about in textbooks, or is something else, something newer, and maybe a little more invisible, taking its place all around us?
Okay, so before we can even get into where capitalism might be headed, we've got to get on the same page about what it even is. So let's start with the absolute basics. Capitalism 101.
So here's the textbook definition, right? And the two phrases to really zoom in on here are private owners and for profit. So unlike other systems where maybe the government owns the big factories or the farms, in capitalism, it's individuals or companies. And what's their main goal? You guessed it, to make a profit. Think of these as the gears that make the whole machine run. It all kicks off with private property, the right to actually own stuff, whether it's a factory or a piece of code. Then you've got market competition, which is basically the race to build a better mousetrap. Wage labor is the fuel, where we all trade our time and skills for a paycheck. And the entire system is driven by that one powerful incentive, the profit motive. And it's all built on the assumption of constant economic growth.
So how does anyone decide what anything costs? Well, it all boils down to this really elegant, really powerful idea. If a ton of people want something, but there's not a lot of it to go around, that's high demand, low supply, the price shoots up. If there's a mountain of something that nobody really wants, the price plummets. It's that simple. That dynamic is kind of like the invisible hand guiding the whole market.
Okay, so we've established that capitalism is a crazy powerful engine for creating wealth. But that, of course, raises the next big question. Where does all that wealth actually end up? And that brings us to one of the most hotly debated topics out there, economic inequality. Now, this isn't about passing judgment, It's just about understanding what's actually happening. To have a real conversation about this stuff, you need a way to measure the gap between the richest and the poorest in a society. And lucky for us, economists have a tool that's perfect for the job. Now, I know this graph looks a little technical, but trust me, the idea is super simple. That straight line going up in an angle, that's a fantasy world of perfect equality. It's where the bottom 20% of people have 20% of the money, the bottom 50% have 50% of the money, and so on. The curved line, the Lorenz curve, that shows you what's happening in the real world. And the bigger the belly of that curve, the bigger the gap is between the straight line and reality, well, the more unequal things are.
And this is the brilliant part. We can actually turn that visual gap into one simple, powerful number, the Gini coefficient. All you do is take the size of that gap, area A, and you divide it by the total area under that perfect straight line, which is A plus B. That's it. That one little ratio gives us a standard way to compare inequality in any country on Earth.
So here's the key takeaway, right? The score is always going to be somewhere between 0 and 1. A Gini of 0 means perfect equality. Everyone makes the exact same amount of money. A Gini of 1 is the total opposite. One single person has all the money and everyone else has 0. Now, of course, no country is ever at a perfect 0 or 1. Everyone falls somewhere on the spectrum in between. Okay, so let's put some real numbers to this. Check out a country like Denmark. It's got a pretty low Gini score, 0.28. And you can see why. The poorest 20% of people there still earn almost 10% of the country's income. Now look all the way at the other end, at South Africa. The Gini is way higher at 0.63. Why? Because the poorest 20% get just over 2% of the income, while the richest 20% take home a whopping 68%. This just makes it crystal clear. Capitalism can look radically different depending on where you are. So far, we've been talking about wealth you can see, right? Like money, property, things you can hold. But what happens when the most valuable resource isn't something you can own, but something you are? This brings us to a whole new frontier, a different kind of capitalism that lives where we all spend our time, online. Harvard professor Shoshana Zuboff put a name to this new system. She calls it surveillance capitalism. And her argument is this: our own private human experiences, our clicks, our likes, our private conversations, even where we are physically standing, are being taken without us really knowing and treated like a free natural resource, just like oil or timber, except the resource is us. So how does this whole thing work? Well, Zuboff breaks it down into 3 basic steps. First, companies claim your data. It's usually hidden away in those long terms of service agreements that, let's be honest, nobody ever reads. Second, they compute. They use incredible AI to sift through all this data you leave behind to create predictions about what you're going to do next or buy next. And finally, step 3, they sell. But they're not selling your data. They're selling predictions about you to other businesses who want to influence you.
And this is just a massive shift from what we were all promised in the early days of the internet, right? We were told it would lead to a democratization of knowledge for everyone. Instead, knowledge about us has been concentrated into the hands of just a few giant companies. We thought it would empower us as individuals, but we got tools designed to predict and control our behavior. The internet was supposed to be a tool that served us. For many, it's become a tool to profit from us.
And this right here is probably the most critical and kind of chilling part of Zuboff's entire argument. The game isn't just to predict what you'll do anymore. The real money is in guaranteeing what you'll do. The goal is to actuate, to subtly nudge, tune, and herd our behavior, using little rewards and punishments to push us toward their profitable outcomes. And this, she says, isn't just about selling ads. It's a direct threat to our autonomy, to our very idea of free will. So, we've got the classic model, and now we have this new, data-driven mutation of it. And it proves one thing for sure. Capitalism is not this single, static thing. It's constantly changing, constantly evolving. So, the big question is, what does its next chapter look like?
Yeah, it's really important to get that capitalism isn't this one-size-fits-all thing. You have welfare capitalism like in the Nordic countries with these huge social safety nets. You've got state capitalism where the government itself is the biggest player in the market. And then you have new ideas popping up like eco-capitalism, which tries to use market forces to solve problems like climate change. The point is, the system is incredibly adaptable.
But, as we think about the future, it's so important to remember the challenges that are happening right now. Look at this number, 54.8. What's that? Well, that was the Gini coefficient for Colombia in 2022. It's just a stark reminder that for millions and millions of people, extreme inequality isn't some abstract theory. It's their daily reality. Which brings us to one last kind of provocative thought to leave you with. Maybe the most important debate we should be having isn't about the labels we use, capitalism versus something else. Maybe the real question is about the values we build into whatever system we have. Whether we're talking about trading goods or trading personal data, is the system designed to benefit the few or to benefit the many? Answering that question, well, that's what will define whatever comes next.